Mr. Popper had always been a little absent-minded. This is how he made his great mistake when he said to the first taxi driver, "Regal Theater." "Yes, sir," said the driver, threading his way in and out of the traffic on Broadway, which greatly interested both the children and the penguins. They'd almost reached the theater when the driver suddenly turned. "Say," he said, "you don't mean to say those penguins are going to be on the same bill with Swenson's seals, do you?" "I don't know what else is on the bill," said Mr. Popper, paying him. "Anyway, here's the Regal." And they piled out and filed in the stage entrance. In the wings there stood a large, burly-faced red man. "So these are the Popper performing penguins, huh?" he said. "Well, I want to tell you, Mr. Popper, I'm Swen Swenson, and those are my seals in there on the stage now, and if your birds try any funny business, it'll be too bad for them. My seals are tough, see? They think nothing of eating 2 or 3 penguins apiece." From the stage could be heard the hoarse barks of the seals who were going through their act. "Papa," said Mrs. Popper, "the penguins are the last act on the bill. You go run back quick and get those taxis, and we'll let the penguins ride around a while till it's time for their number." Mr. Popper hurried out to catch the drivers. When he returned, it was too late. The Popper performing penguins had already discovered the seals. "Papa, I can't look!" cried the children. There was a sound of dreadful confusion on the stage, and the audience was in an uproar, and the curtain was quickly rung down. When the Poppers rushed onto the stage, both penguins and seals had found the stairway leading to the Swenson dressing room and were on their way upstairs. "I can't bear to think what's happening up there," said Mr. Popper with a shudder. Swenson only laughed. "I hope your birds were insured, Popper," he said. "How much were they worth? Well, let's go up and look." "You go up, Papa," said Mrs. Popper. "Bill, you run out of the theater and call the police to come and try and save some of our penguins." "I'll get the fire department," said Janey. When the firemen, with great clanging, came to see and set up their ladders so they could get through the window of Mr. Swenson's dressing room, they were a little vexed to find out there was no fire at all. However, when they found 6 black-mustached seals sitting barking in the middle of the room with 12 penguins parading around them in a square, they felt better. Then the policemen came in their patrol and climbed up the ladder which the firemen had left against the building, and by the time they came through the window they could scarcely believe their eyes, because the firemen had put firemen's helmets on the penguins, which made the delighted birds look very silly. Seeing the firemen so friendly with the penguins, the policemen naturally took sides with the seals and put policemen's caps on them. The seals looked very fierce with their long black mustaches and black faces underneath. The penguins, under their firemen's helmets, were parading in front of the policemen, while the seals, in their policemen's caps, were barking at the firemen, when Mr. Popper and Mr. Swenson finally opened the door. Mr. Popper sat down. His relief was so great that for a minute he could not speak. "You policemen had better get your hats off my seals now," said Mr. Swenson. "I've got to go down the stage and finish the act." Then he and his 6 seals slipped out of the room with a few parting barks. "Well, goodbye, ducks," said the fireman, regretfully removing the helmets from the penguins and putting them on their own heads. Then they disappeared down the ladder. The penguins, of course, wanted to follow, but Mr. Popper held them back. Just then the door flew open and the theater manager burst into the room. "Hold that man!" shouted the policeman, pointing at Mr. Popper. "I've got a warrant for his arrest." "Who, me?" said Mr. Popper. "What have I done?" "You've broken into my theater and thrown the place into a panic. That's what you've done. You're a disturber of the peace." "I'm Mr. Popper, and these are my performing penguins, famous from coast to coast." "I don't care who you are. You haven't any business in my theater." "Mr. Greenbaum is going to pay us $5,000 a week at the Regal." "Mr. Greenbaum's theater is the Royal, not the Regal. You've come to the wrong theater. Anyway, out you go, and you and your performing penguins. The patrol is waiting outside." So Mr. Popper, with Captain Cook, Greta, Columbus, Louisa, Nelson, Jenny, Magellan, Adelina, Scott, Isabella, Ferdinand, and Victoria, was bundled into the patrol wagon and hustled off to the police station. None of his pleas could move the desk sergeant. "That theater manager is pretty mad at the way you busted into his theater, so I'm holding you. I'm going to give you all a nice quiet cell unless you furnish bail. I'm putting the bail at $5,000 for you and $100 for each of the birds." Of course, Mr. Popper did not have that much money about him. Neither did Mrs. Popper when they telephoned her at the hotel. The hotel bill was paid for several days ahead, but she had no cash. The check for the final week's salary was not due until the end of the week. Indeed, it now looked as if the Poppers would never see that check, since they could not get the penguins out of jail long enough to put on their act at the Royal Theatre. If only they could have got in touch with Mr. Greenbaum, Mr. Popper knew, that kind man would have gotten them out. But Mr. Greenbaum was somewhere in Hollywood, and the Poppers had no idea how to reach him. It was very dull for the birds in jail. Wednesday came, and there was still no word from Mr. Greenbaum. Thursday, the birds began to droop. It was soon apparent, from the lack of exercise combined with the heat might prove too much for them. There were no more tricks or merry games. Even the younger birds sat all day in dismal silence, and Mr. Popper could not cheer them up. He had a feeling Mr. Greenbaum would probably turn up by the end of the week to see about renewing the contract, but Friday passed without any news. Saturday morning, Mr. Popper got up very early and smoothed his hair, and he dusted off the penguins as well he could. He wanted everything to look as presentable as possible in case Mr. Greenbaum should appear. About 10 o'clock there was a sound of footsteps in the corridor, and a jingling of keys, and the door of his cell was opened.